This is The Seeker's Guide to Twisted Taverns, a third-party 5th edition supplement book that I backed on Kickstarter a couple years ago. This product only exists because of something called the Open Game License for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, a rule that stipulates that companies and individuals can make supplemental material for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and sell it for profit. Like this. And this is by no means the only book of its kind. I'm certain you've seen sponsorships for books and products like Grim Hollow, Griffin Saddlebag, and many more. All of these companies and the products they sell are only available for you, the consumer, because of the Open Game License. And recently there's been a rumor circulating the Dungeons & Dragons community thanks to emails being leaked and information from WotC employees. This rumor being that with one D&D releasing in 2024, the Open Game License will be no more. 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons is the most popular edition to date, but I think a big part of why it is so popular is because whenever you get tired or bored of the current edition of Dungeons & Dragons and the official rules, you can always turn to Homebrew. And that's not to say that Homebrew only exists in 5th edition, far from it, but Homebrew has been made far more popular and far more readily accessible thanks to the Open Game License. Because prior to 5th edition D&D, if you wanted to make Homebrew and sell this Homebrew by your own creation and mass market it, you would not be allowed to because there was no such deal for that. You would have to give your Homebrew away for free on online forums and that would be the end of it. Because any attempt to try and profit off of your Homebrew off of the Wizards of the Coast product would be met with lawsuits. But thus 5th edition brought the Open Game License, which allowed anybody to make 5th edition Homebrew products for the game and then sell it as their own creation. And this has been one of the greatest things for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition in its entirety. A similar thing can be said about DM's Guild, which doesn't operate under the same rules as the Open Game License, but it allows anybody to make 5th edition rules, campaigns, and items and upload them onto DM's Guild and make a profit from that. And homebrewing, especially for me as a dungeon master, is where I have some of the most fun in my Dungeons & Dragons games. Some dungeon masters will homebrew rules to make Dungeons & Dragons a much harder game and a much more grittier story. And some DMs will homebrew their games so that D&D floats right along the clouds and is easy and fast-paced as ever. And the wonderful thing about it is that if any of these dungeon masters really wanted to take their homebrewing and their worlds and their settings, their items, and sell their ideas online, they absolutely can because of the Open Game License. But now, if these rumors are to be believed, all of that will go away in 2024. It's time to tell you a story. Back when Dungeons & Dragons was in 3.5 edition and they were ready to move on to 4th edition, they had a similar thing to the current Open Game License during 3.5. But with their move to 4th edition, they decided to get rid of the Open Game License and transfer over to something else entirely. Something that was not very well received by the community at large. This caused many creators and companies to take their creations they were making for D&D under the 3.5 Open Game License and simply take that and make their own game instead and tweak the rules as is, instead of continuing on with D&D into 4th edition. And this is how we got Pathfinder. The reason 1st edition Pathfinder is so similar to Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 is because it was effectively the same system. So then it seemed Wizards learned from their mistakes, and with the introduction of 5th edition, they brought back the Open Game License. So it would seem that Wizards has learnt from their history. If they were to move to get rid of the Open Game License in favor of one D&D's new edition, would that not cause the same thing to happen again? And the answer is yes, probably very likely. But I don't think Wizards is scared of that. And back then, it is very easy to tell that Wizards had no idea what would happen to their game when they removed the Open Game License, and that's of course why they brought it back. But now with D&D being bigger than ever, I don't think WotC is afraid of that, because it's not just about the game anymore. It's a lifestyle brand with many, many pockets to pull money from. In a recent interview mainly meant for investors, but nonetheless heard by the wider audience at large, the CEO of Dungeons & Dragons stated, "The brand that makes Hasbro billions of dollars a year is heavily undermonetized." Because as they point out, while Dungeon Masters only make about 20% of the entire D&D audience, they buy most of the products. Hasbro's plans for Dungeons & Dragons are no longer just about the game. It's about every other market they're not currently tapped into. If you've noticed, there's a lot more D&D products not related to the game directly that have been coming out over the years. Lots more stuffed animals, more toys, there's the new movie coming out, and every other market that D&D can somehow get their brand into, they're exploring. Because it is not enough for Hasbro to just make money off of the books and the material directly related to the game. They want to make it a lifestyle brand. They have to get their hands into every bit of the market they can, because that is how they go from only 20% of the players being Dungeon Masters buying all their product to everybody else also buying their product. So I think it's a very real risk that the open game license goes away with the new edition, and I, like you, am very angry about that. But unfortunately at this point, Wizards doesn't really care what we think about the changes they make to the game unless it hurts their bottom line, unless it hurts their profits. And that is where we get into the last part of our journey. So, what's to be done about all this then? What can we possibly do to tell Wizards that, hey, keep the open game license, this isn't okay? Simple. Don't buy the new product. Unfortunately for a company as big as Wizards of the Coast, and more importantly their overseers Hasbro, surveys and user reception doesn't really matter anymore. When a company becomes so big, it can't fail anymore. It doesn't matter how much people hate or love the company. As long as people are buying the product, they will continue to thrive. Smaller companies rely on making a good game system for you to enjoy because they know that if the game is good, you will continue to buy it and you will continue to support them. If they don't make a good game, you won't buy their product and they will flounder and go under. Unfortunately, D&D does not work that way. Dungeons & Dragons is a massive name. It is everywhere and everyone has heard of it at least once. And because of that, regardless of your opinions on if you like Dungeons & Dragons, don't like Dungeons & Dragons, like Dungeons & Dragons, don't like the company, don't like the game, doesn't matter. Only thing that counts as failure towards Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro at large is when profits do not continue to go up. It's only when profits stagnate or at worst, dwindle. And if Wizards of the Coast does in fact pull the open game license when they release one D&D, and they do see that the market at large suddenly does not continue to purchase their products, that will affect their bottom line, it will affect their shareholders, and questions will start to get asked. Because unfortunately we're at the point right now where even if you don't really like Wizards of the Coast, you will still buy the Dungeons & Dragons product because you still love the game despite not liking the company. And this happens for almost every company anywhere near the size of Dungeons & Dragons. You don't like the products at Walmart, but you're still gonna buy them. You may not like Dungeons & Dragons, but you're still gonna play it because all your friends are playing it. I may not like the practices at WotC, and I may hate Hasbro as a company and what they stand for and what they're doing to the games that I love, but all my friends play their games. And I do too, because I do love the games. Because you can love something and be critical of it at the same time. It is healthy to do so. If these rumors turn out to be true, if Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro at large does pull the open game license for one D&D in 2024, and you can no longer have third-party companies making game products for Dungeons & Dragons, I will not support them anymore. I will continue to play 5th edition games with my friends, I will continue to run homebrew adventures in 5th edition, and I will only do that. Because I love 5th edition. I've had a blast with 5th edition, I have homebrew items I've directly purchased from Kickstarter and other websites for 5th edition, and I could run enormous amounts of one-shots, full-length campaigns, ridiculous game systems, all under the 5th edition rule set, and I could do that for years and never get tired. I don't need one D&D. I don't need the newest edition. I'm excited for it just as much as anybody else. But if they pull the open game license, I won't support them one penny.